At last, a voice for the people who pay big government's bills, not those who make big government's bills. You are listening to Speaking of Taxpayers here on Gimme Radio, sponsored by the 362,000 member strong National Taxpayers Union. I am your host, Pete Sepp.
And I'm Natasha Altamirano.
Welcome to the program, Gimme Radio listeners. In this segment of Speaking of Taxpayers, I'd like to introduce you to someone who is speaking for taxpayers, the latest addition to National Taxpayers Union's bright, energetic, and fantastic staff. She's saying it loud, she's saying it proud. Her name is Jordan Forbes. Welcome to the program, Jordan.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Excellent. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, how you came to National Taxpayers Union, and what you hope to do here?
Absolutely. Well, I am originally from Virginia. I graduated from the University of Virginia in 2006 and went to Capitol Hill to work for Congressman Tom Davis, the former congressman from the 11th District of Virginia. Worked my way up to legislative assistant in that office and handled a myriad of issues, primarily healthcare, education, and tax. Worked for him for a couple of years and then did some work with DMM Media, a political consulting firm, during the last election cycle, and then came here. And I'm looking forward to continuing my policy background and continuing to fight for the taxpayers across the nation.
Outstanding. She's been in the belly of the beast, and she knows how to fight the beast.
And you've pretty much jumped right into everything here during your first couple weeks. Tell us about some of the issues that you've been working on and what's on your plate coming up. Absolutely.
Well, last week, our big issue was the Federal Aviation Administration Act of 2009, otherwise known as the FAA Reauthorization Bill. And that was sponsored by Representative James Oberstar from Michigan, who is also chairman of the House Transportation Committee. And that basically reauthorized FAA wanting to make some improvements to the air traffic control system. And we had a few big concerns with various provisions in the bill. We did submit an open letter to all members in the House of Representatives prior to the bill. And some of those concerns we had, first and foremost, was the increase in the passenger facility charge, which would increase that charge from $4.50 up to $7, which would impose an additional $2 billion per year tax on airline passengers. And for those of you who don't know what the passenger facility charge is, it was originally created with the purpose to enhance airport capacity and functionality. But our biggest problem with it is that the funds are too often used to subsidize non-essential programs. And so we just think instead of raising the PFC charge, there needs to be greater cost-benefit analysis to make sure that those fees are, certainly that we're making the best use of them as possible. There was also a contract in 2006 between the FAA and air traffic controllers, and that essentially overturned the contract of 1998, which many think is too expensive. And this bill would essentially revert back to the 1998 contract, and essentially that is going to cost taxpayers $7.5 billion over the next 10 years. And the National Air Traffic Controllers Association is really lobbying for the 1998 contract, which would essentially raise the salaries of all of our air traffic controllers. And for those of you who don't know, they're already making upwards of $170,000 in total compensation per year, which is pretty generous. But in a time of economic crisis, we're concerned that if you up those salaries and force the FAA into an even more expensive contract, then the taxpayers are really going to suffer for that. And it will also limit the FAA their ability to invest in much needed modernization. And one of my biggest fears is that it'll give the union too much control over the schedules. Our final concern is just the method by which we are going to reform the current air traffic control system. We are big proponents of a private sector-driven air traffic control system. We think that will enable us to bring the best and the brightest minds into the aviation industry to implement complex technology projects that will bring us one step closer to long-term reform. So those were our issues with the bill. Unfortunately, it did pass the House on May 21st by a vote of 277 to 136. But we're certainly going to stay tuned as it will now move to the Senate for further consideration.
There's an old saying, folks, I think it was Scarlett O'Hara who said, death and taxes and childbirth, there's never a good time for any of them. When you go to the airport or you go onto the internet to purchase an airline ticket, you will see just what an awful time you will have with all the taxes added to your tickets. You've probably been down this road before, folks. You find a great airfare to Europe, perhaps. You get it for $400, and then you don't realize there are international departure taxes, international arrival taxes, agricultural inspection fees, passenger facility charges, the airline ticket excise tax, a fuel surcharge. It goes on and on to the point where the tax burden on a ticket of that price could be 25, even 30%. Enough is enough. That's what we're saying here, isn't that, Jordan?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
No, and that, I mean, it had a lot of opposition, but like I said, we'll continue to monitor it as it goes forth in the Senate, and they will likely vote on that. My guess is before the Labor Day recess. I don't think it will come up before then, but probably sometime in September.
Thank goodness. So we do have time to fight this.
Absolutely. Let's see. In terms of other legislation that is looming, another one of our big concerns is the debate over the streamlined sales tax, more specifically the streamlined sales tax project. And just so you guys understand, that the streamlined sales tax is essentially changing the way we charge sales taxes from source-based, which means that you pay where you buy, to destination-based, which is when you pay where you live. And, our biggest concern with this is that, the internet remains, one of the last few relatively tax-free markets, and certainly a shining light in our free market system. And so we're concerned that will impact that. It'll impose collection on small businesses who can least afford it. Right now, the Streamlined Sales Tax Project is a campaign by state and local governments to try to get states kind of on board with this campaign. And essentially, they are trying to bring their sales tax laws into compliance under a set of rules called the Streamlined Sales Tax Agreement. Now, the way this works, 22 of 45 states that charge sales taxes have now done this, but they can't require tax collection until Congress passes a bill. And so even though, just to make sure you guys understand, even though they have brought their laws into compliance under a set of rules, they cannot collect the sales taxes until Congress passes a law. So it really is in the hands of Congress, which is scary because this is an imminent threat that we have heard will probably reach committee and the House floor within the next couple of months. Senator Mike Enzi and Representative William Delahunt have introduced the Sales Tax Fairness and Simplification Act in previous Congresses, and word on the street is that they are likely to do so again. Probably this month we'll see language. Like I said, we do not have language dropped up to this point or a bill number. But inevitably, if this is passed, the citizens are going to be paying more. Like I said, it's going to impose collection on small businesses who can't afford it, but it's also going to make it harder for online consumers to compete because consumers will now be paying taxes and shipping, which is going to make them less likely to shop online. So that's just a concern that we have for the internet and for our friends in online commerce, and we'll certainly stay tuned in to that debate. And like I said, that will probably occur within the next month or two. So stay posted.
Some of you folks out there may be saying, well, I don't shop on the internet. I don't trust that newfangled thing that might steal my credit card, steal my identity. I might end up somewhere in outer East Asia as an alternate identity, charging millions of dollars that I don't really have. Well, this also affects traditional catalog sales, folks. In fact, this whole issue came up owing to a Supreme Court case called Quill versus North Dakota. What the court held is that if you buy a good or a service in another state, the firm that you buy it from is not compelled to collect sales taxes from your jurisdiction and remit it to the jurisdiction. Catalog orders would also fall under this streamlined sales tax project. So even if you never touch the internet, even if you don't go online And folks, if you're listening to this program online, you've already cheated. But if you do, if you order by mail, if you go on the internet, you're going to get hit either way with this. And boy, the taxes could be incredibly steep.
Absolutely. And I think it's also important to note, why we're seeing this kind of sudden surge in debate on this issue. And I mean, we think, obviously the states are, dealing with these record budget shortfalls, and they really are getting desperate, and they're looking for anything, that they can get their hands on to raise revenue, to increase taxes. And this seems like, their most likely bet. And so, we think that's the reason why there's this sudden kind of resurfacing of the issue, but it's not going to go away. And it's like I said, word on the street is that we will see legislation within the next couple of months prior to the August recess. So not good legislation, and certainly something that taxpayers will suffer from.
So 22 states have already signed the streamlined sales tax agreement, and it's likely that more will jump on board as their budgets continue to face, crisis situations.
Absolutely. In fact, there are actually a few that are working on it now, so we're likely to see that number jump within the next couple of weeks even.
Well, now there's another sleeper bill out there introduced by a congresswoman from North Carolina, I believe, that would deal with one of the worst practices of the federal government as far as tax policy is concerned. Isn't that right, Jordan?
Absolutely. It's the Federal Withholding Tax Act, and that's H.R. 1919, and it's sponsored by Congresswoman Virginia Foxx from North Carolina. It's great legislation. She has put forth language in previous Congresses, but unfortunately has not been able to get out of committee. We're hoping that changes this Congress. But basically, the bill would repeal the law that requires employers to withhold federal income taxes from your wages and salaries. And, many of you will notice that your take-home pay is significantly less than your salary. And much of that is your federal income tax money that's being taken out of that. Now, it's important to note that this withholding system was sold to the public as a temporary wartime measure during World War II. It was known as a victory tax, never intended to be a permanent measure, but it's continued on. And the biggest problem with that, it has indirect and direct costs associated with it, but the biggest problem is that you're allowing the government to essentially take your wealth on an interest-free basis, and you're losing interest through this withholding system, which is the biggest problem. Indirectly, it certainly hinders pro-tax policy because you all are, unaware of how much the government really is taking from you. And just to paint a picture, the U.S. Census Bureau reported the median income for a single-person household is $30,176. So that means that if you're a single individual with no children and wage-only income, you would owe $2,823 in federal income tax, which sounds like a lot, if you're stroking out a check in one sitting every April 15th. But when the government takes out a relatively small amount of that each week, $54.29 to be exact, it doesn't seem so bad. And so the problem with that is, you all don't realize how much you really are paying in tax money, and it's going to hinder pro-tax policy. And, one of the biggest strengths of our organization is getting citizens like you, fired up about tax policy, really going to members of Congress, your senators, and encouraging them to vote to lower your taxes. And, I'm a firm believer that public opinion is a powerful force in steering legislation. And so if, we don't have the citizens fired up about these issues, then that's not going to happen. And so that's one thing it does. But again, the direct cost is that it's going to cost you roughly $100 each year in foregone interest, which doesn't seem like a lot, but certainly that's money that you could have used to buy your family groceries or invest in your family's future needs, and it's your money, and so you shouldn't be having to go without that. So we are, certainly an advocate of this bill. We think that the withholding tax system is not a good idea. If this bill passes, it would allow businesses to save billions of dollars because they'll be able to cut through bureaucratic red tape, paperwork, but also, provide you all with opportunities to gain that interest back. One way to do that would be setting up personal savings accounts and putting aside that IRS tax money if you do want to save it. But that way you can earn interest on that over the course of the year and you won't be losing that. So that's HR 1919. It's currently pending in the House Ways and Means Committee. We will certainly stay tuned to that debate, and hopefully we will see that come to the floor for a vote in the coming months.
You know, it was the late, great David Brinkley who wrote a book, I believe the title was Washington at War, in which he explained this entire withholding scheme. He had said that Congress and official Washington had learned what used car salesmen had known already, that if you spread out payments chunk by chunk over time, you'll get people to pay more than they normally would if they had to write a big check all at once. And there's literal truth to that, because the entire withholding scheme was concocted by a consultant to the Roosevelt administration, a fellow by the name of Beardsley Rummel. That's Beardsley Rummel. Sounds like a very highfalutin name. He was an executive with the Macy's department store, ironically. And he was the one who suggested, hey, let's do a withholding plan the way we do a lot of these buy things on time plans. Then we can sucker people into paying a whole lot more than they would otherwise want to. An interesting genesis, and one that we have been paying for ever since. Well, those are just a few of the issues we have on our plates here at National Taxpayers Union. There are a whole lot more. You've got this cap-and-trade energy scheme that would add to people's electricity bills. You've got the entire healthcare reform debate coming with a whole raft of tax proposals, everything from taxes on soda to perhaps even more payroll taxes to bail out the ailing Medicare system. One thing you can be sure of, folks, is that you have able, capable, willing representatives like Jordan Forbes on the fight for you day in and day out. She doesn't get a lot of sleep, folks, but she's still happy to do it. Thank you so much for being with us, Jordan. We will be hearing from you again.
Absolutely. Great to be here.
And now, Gimme Radio listeners, your absolute favorite, or maybe your most dreaded segment of the week. We are talking about Outrage of the Week, and the topic is beach renourishment. No, it's not about eating a Hershey bar on the seashore. It's about restoring sand to beaches that routinely wash out of sand. Believe it or not, that is a big federal project. As of 2007, more than $2.9 billion in federal funds have gone to beach renourishment since the undertakings began after World War II. Actually, they began more like in the 1960s, but there were still preliminary activities going on even before then. The federal government, through the Army Corps of Engineers, basically does dredging operations to go find a bunch of sand, and then it dumps the sand on the beaches. And what happens, folks? The tides come in, the tides come out. The sand comes in, but the sand mostly goes out. And that's why these beach renourishment projects have to continue year after year. Fortunately, we have pork hunting Senator Tom Coburn of Oklahoma, who is on the case with a new report called Washed Out to Sea, How Congress Prioritizes Beach Pork Over National Needs. He has some shocking findings from his report. Not only that $2.9 billion figure, but here are some other real nasties. Congress has spent around $100 million every year since 1997 for beach replenishment projects. Now, the decade before, in 1987, Congress was only spending about $10 million on these projects. Obviously, some lobbyists in Washington have caught on to this scheme, and they're getting billions of dollars put into beaches that they may represent back in their districts. In fact, there's one former D.C. lobbyist, a former congressional aide in a lobbying shop, who has been so successful securing earmarked beach funds for its clients that he has netted almost $200 million for 4 clients alone in a 2007 congressional bill. As Coburn points out, the head lobbyist for this firm has been nicknamed Santa Claus. Not Santa, Santa Claus. Some more egregious examples: Cape May, New Jersey, and Ocean City, New Jersey. Lovely places to visit. I've been there. I absolutely love laying out catching the breeze, catching some rays, but between 1962 and 1965, Cape May has been renourished 10 times by the federal government. Ocean City, 22 times between 1952 and 1995. This is naturally a joint project. The localities pay some of it, but taxpayers who will never even visit these beaches will be on the hook for a whole lot of money. And incredibly, there are negative environmental consequences to some of these things. Sea turtle hatchlings were trapped beneath the surface of the sand that became concretized when a beach was renourished in Port St. Lucie, Florida. Now, all of this is happening as there are, according to Senator Coburn, at least 985 levees nationwide that are at significant risk of failure due to flooding. Meanwhile, the federal government, again, is picking up about 2/3 of the tab for the costs of these beach projects, while state and local governments are putting in a 1/3 share. This is an area ripe for reform. No matter how much you love beaches, shouldn't levees come first? Shouldn't other infrastructure priorities take precedence over things that are primarily commercial activities that benefit local areas? We need to start thinking smarter about the way the Army Corps of Engineers spends its money. Otherwise, when the next Katrina hits, we're going to have just as big a fiscal and a human disaster as we did from that awful storm.
So tell us, Pete, why do these projects not receive more attention and criticism, either in the media or by members of Congress?
Well, for one thing, I think there are so many members of Congress who steer these funds toward beaches and then can brag about it in press releases to the folks back home saying, hey, look at me, I'm helping to ensure that the local beach economy is thriving and surviving during this recessionary period. And in some cases, I think the Army Corps of Engineers feels like they have to undertake these projects, even if they think they have priorities elsewhere. I mean, this is a larger problem in the whole energy and water development sector of federal policy. The Army Corps of Engineers has a tremendous multi-billion-dollar backlog of projects that Congress has authorized but has not really prioritized. And so while all these levees are in possible disrepair or in need of a little renovation, we get these beach projects. And in fact, there have been some of those in the stimulus bill, more beach renourishment and other waterside developments. I recall that the boardwalk in Atlantic City, as well as a Delaware beach, not Atlantic City, folks, sorry, in Coney Island, as well as a Delaware beach, was receiving stimulus funds to be rebuilt. Again, lovely things to walk on, to lay out on and catch the sun, but is that really what we want out of a stimulus bill? Is that really what we want for lasting jobs for our economy? I don't know if the retail economy of those areas will necessarily benefit from these things when people don't have the money to spend in the first place. That should be the goal of policymakers, getting our economy thriving again so folks have the money to take vacations and spend at places like these. Simply dumping more sand on the beach isn't going to cause people to say, hey, I'm broke, but I'm going to visit the seaside anyway.
That's right, Gimme Radio listeners. You heard it here. Beach renourishment, that is the outrage of the week. That just about wraps up this week's Speaking of Taxpayers. Thank you for joining us. I'm Natasha Altamirano.
And I'm Pete Sepp. Remember, you have the power to fight the power if you speak truth to power. And we speak truth to power every week here on